AI is probably better than a typical person at forecasting just because a typical person doesn't have much experience.
Welcome to the Center for AI Policy podcast, where we zoom into the strategic landscape of AI and unpack its implications for U.S. policy. I'm your host, Jacob Kraus, and today's guest is Peter Wildeford. Peter is Chief Advisory Executive and co-founder at the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy, or IAPS, a think tank focused on enhancing national competitiveness in AI and mitigating emerging risks. We discuss Forecasting 101, the U.S. government's forecasting track record, integrating forecasters into government, AI's societal impacts and opportunities, AI's improving software skills, AI-powered forecasting systems, future AI trajectories, and more. I hope you enjoy. Peter, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah. You are a board member at this forecasting platform called Metaculus, and you have a really good track record there. I want to just go over for the audience the definition Metaculus gives of forecasting, which is the practice of putting explicit probabilities, dates, and numbers on future events, calculating the odds with both models and human judgment. So what do you think more policymakers should know about forecasting?
Yeah, I think there's like a few important things to know about forecasting. I think firstly, we're always forecasting all the time. We're just doing it implicitly, but all policymakers are making kind of intuitive judgments about the future. For example, like what will particular policies accomplish? Will they like backfire in unexpected ways? Will they be able to be enforced correctly? Will they be like future proofed as technology changes? Will they kind of be like fit to purpose for what the policies are trying to do? So we're all implicitly forecasting. What I think Metaculus seeks to do, and what like the study of forecasting seeks to do, say from like Philip Tetlock's like 20 years of work on studying forecasting, is try to be very explicit about this, kind of taking a more like CIA analysis style approach to kind of like all sorts of different things in life. And so like I think there's like a few problems with kind of forecasting as it's practiced implicitly. I think firstly is Philip Tetlock, who studied forecasting in political and geopolitical domains, found that a lot of political experts made predictions that were no better than chance. Basically, you could perform the same just by flipping a coin and going with whatever the coin says. That's not really good if you're making really high stakes decisions based on your forecasting. I think another issue is what Tetlock refers to as vague verbiage, such as using like "it may happen," "it could happen," "it might happen." Those are three different things, but they all kind of sound the same, but also sound a little bit different, and it's like a bit confusing. For example, when Kennedy was launching the Bay of Pigs invasion, he was basing it off of like a Joint Chiefs assessment of a fair chance of success, where apparently by fair chance, the Joint Chiefs was referring to less than 50-50 likely, but Kennedy interpreted that as a higher likelihood of success. So avoiding these fiascos with like very explicit statements about levels of confidence, I think could just lead to better decision making. So I think the kind of main idea behind forecasting is better decision making. I think lastly, is that when you're assessing forecasting, you can actually develop a track record, like an actual quantitative track record, by keeping track of the predictions you've made and how they've turned out. And then you can find that people who tend to have a good track record in the past also tends to have a good track record in the future. And so rather than listening to various TV pundits who kind of spout off, but without actually really having a good track record of making statements, I would recommend listening to, I guess, forecasters like myself to be a bit grandiose, or websites like Metaculus that have developed these track records and speak in very specific, easy to understand ways, and ultimately leading to better decision making.
Yeah, it's really interesting that some experts are doing no better than chance. I think we assume that they're going to do a lot better than chance. So people's next question might be, can you do much better than chance? Like, what's so special about the people who spend time on Metaculus? How much of an improvement could they really get?
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, honestly, I don't think there's really anything magic about it. Um, Basically, like many other skills, it improves with practice. So if you try actually making explicit forecasts where you put specific probabilities on specific events, like you can do on an Attaculus platform, and you keep track of your performance over time, and you then you can like kind of see what you get right and what you get wrong. And if you kind of like do like post game analysis, you can then kind of reflect on your mistakes and improve. Honestly, it's kind of like really playing any sort of sport. Like, you're not going to expect to do amazing at football on your very first game, but if you practice and then you film the games and you roll the tape and you look back at what went right, what went wrong, and you do specific drills, you can improve your football skill. I think the same is true of forecasting as well.
Yeah, I think for some of these domains, you were talking about how policymakers are making lots of forecasts about whether a policy will work out, whether a tax policy will do something good, whether tariffs will have a certain effect, whether doing something with the minimum wage. I'm kind of listing a bunch of economic policies, but you could do it for AI policy, you could do it for healthcare. So when people hear the forecasters are doing so much better, I think there still might be some hesitancy because these forecasters might be predicting unrelated things. So, do you think it's important still to have the subject matter expertise? Maybe we just have the existing healthcare policy wonks take a few practice rounds or courses on forecasting, practice it, get better at it for a year until they start having some diminishing returns, and then they'll be doing much better at their job. Is it just a matter of training people up in a little forecasting?
Yeah, I mean, I think for like high stakes forecasting where you're making like a go, no go decision based on an expectation of the future, I think yeah, having some forecasting training where like that level of precision matters, I think would be pretty beneficial. I think one thing that Philip Tetlock's research has pointed to, that's something I'm quite interested in, is just this idea of generalist forecasting skill, which basically is like if you're kind of well practiced at the art and science of putting quantified numbers on things that are very hard to quantify, that this actually can work in a lot of different domains, even domains that you don't have much prior exposure to. You can still kind of outperform domain experts, just because the domain experts know an awful lot about their domain, but just are not very skilled or practiced at putting numbers on those hard to quantify things. And usually the best way to thread the needle on this, according to Tetlock's work, is what's called yeah, forecaster subject expert teaming, which is basically you form a team where you have domain experts sort of analyze the question, break it down into reasons for and against, and try to put a probability on it. And often they're like very skilled at breaking down the problem and very skilled at like figuring out what matters and what doesn't, but less skilled at actually putting the final number on the probability. And that's again like not because forecasters are better than everyone else, but just due to it being like a separate skill that needs separate practice. And then generally the forecaster on the team can then come in and read the breakdown. And they're generally like much less good at creating that sort of breakdown, but much better at reading the breakdown and then like figuring out actually what number that implies. And then kind of usually through their powers combined, the domain expertise combined with the forecasting skill at putting numbers on things, you end up with a stronger result than the domain experts alone or the forecasters alone.
Okay, so there might be some benefit to combining domain experts with the generalist forecasters.
Yeah, I think that's generally the area I'm most excited about. Yeah, when in my professional work, when I am trying to generate like higher stakes forecasting where like the precision, the accuracy really does matter. Generally, the thing I try to do is recruit a small panel of domain experts and forecasters and kind of work in sort of an iterative loop where each person kind of attempts to forecast individually, and then like brings this together and discusses as a group, and then goes back individually and refines their forecast based on everything that has been said, and then kind of creating like a weighted average across those forecasts for the final answer. Yeah, so like I think the Delphi method is one such example of this, as well as the IDEA method.
Yeah, the Delphi method, I think, is originally from Rand. How much forecasting has already been going on in policymaking?
Yeah, I think it kind of really depends on the area. I think obviously government intelligence communities, I think forecast quite frequently. A lot of Tetlock's original studies were kind of in that sort of intelligence context, and there's certainly a lot of forecasting expertise within the US government, within certain parts, and within RAND, where I don't think that necessarily permeates like across the entire policymaking world, which is like a very large world. And of course, there have been very high profile intelligence failures that have honestly really just been like forecasting failures. And sometimes it's not even like putting the wrong number on things, but I think like kind of failing to ask the right question in the first place and not even kind of like anticipate that something needs to be forecasted.
Do you have specific examples that you're thinking of there?
Yeah, I guess like I think a really famous intelligence failure is yeah, both 9/11 and the Iraq War. I think with 9/11, obviously like a key question would just be like, what is the likelihood of a terrorist attack on US soil leading to a certain number of deaths? I guess what is the likelihood that like airplane hijacking would be the key threat model that leads to this terrorist attack versus like other alternative threat models that could have happened but didn't. And then based on that, the US government could make a decision like how much level of resourcing should there be to airline security enforcement. Obviously, airline security enforcement went up dramatically after 9/11. I think ideally there would have been more airline security before 9/11. And like hypothetically, if we had known to ask the right questions and make the right assessments, we could have oriented policy around that. And I think also like a lot of U.S. Intelligence apparatuses separately had individual pieces of the puzzle that could have been used to make an accurate intelligence assessment, but it was more of like a communication and coordination failure. And this is also what led to the creation of like the Director of National Intelligence, a role currently held by Tulsi Gabbard, whose main job is to coordinate all the intelligence agencies and make sure they are sharing the information needed to make accurate assessments. And then, of course, with the Iraq War, obviously the key question was like, does Saddam Hussein, in fact, have weapons of mass destruction? With the idea that if like Saddam Hussein was about to make a nuclear weapon or a biological or a chemical weapon, then the US would indeed be quite justified in invading Iraq. But of course, there were no actual weapons of destruction found with Hussein. So that was kind of like another failure of forecasting, where we were indeed asking the right question. We were asking whether there were such weapons, but led to like very overconfident assessment that ended up being kind of devastatingly wrong, of course.
Hmm. It sounds from these examples, things like 9/11, the Iraq War, that doing forecasting can solve enormous problems. I think sometimes people hear, especially the probabilities and math side of forecasting, and they feel a bit squeamish because it, one, might give a false sense of confidence. I mean, maybe the best forecasters, it gives a bit better than others. Two, it might encourage people to focus on questions that are easier to forecast accurately, where you can do better than just a 50-50 guess. So and shifting a bit to AI, what are the really useful things forecasting can do and can be done quantitatively?
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of on forecasting, I think it can be a bit daunting, but again, it's something we do every day. Like every morning, we decide what to wear, we decide whether to take an umbrella with us or not, and we're doing this based on either implicit or explicit weather forecasting. And as smart as the weatherman is, and as good as weather models are today, we don't know whether it will actually rain with 100% certainty. And there have been like many cases where we don't think it will rain, don't take an umbrella, and then get rained on, and it's really unpleasant. We don't have that crystal ball. So when we're saying like 80% chance of rain, basically just saying kind of like 80 out of 100 possible futures we might face will have rain, but there's still the 20 where you don't, or I guess vice versa in your case, like if there's only a 10% chance of rain, there's still like 10 days out of 100 where it's going to rain even though you don't think it will. And you don't I mean, some people do blame the weatherman, but it's kind of just a failure of the weatherman from being like a perfect forecaster of the future, and instead just trying to present a range of possibilities. I think this can be really confusing with AI as well, where I think there's a lot of hype, but also a lot of uncertainty. And anyone who is coming on your podcast and telling you exactly what the future holds year by year and exactly what's going to happen with AI, like they're not actually, they don't actually know what they're talking about. Like that's not a good forecast because there's just like way too much uncertainty with AI. There's a lot of worlds where AI moves much faster than we expect and catches us all off guard. Also, a lot of futures where AI kind of ends up being maybe a slower deal or less a big a deal than we think, and it's just kind of like important for the forecasting community, the technological analysis community, to be kind of presenting sort of a range of possibilities and figuring out how to communicate that well, similar to how like a weatherman communicates the weather.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind on predicting the future is that popular AI 2027 report that came out. It had two different endings, so it was showing that there's different ways things can go. But how, from a forecasting perspective, do you view the value of that scenario storytelling forecast document?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think AI 2027 is a really like excellent, meticulous piece of work. I think some people have derided it as like just being science fiction, and honestly, they are correct. Like, it is a piece of science fiction. It's like depicting a particular concrete story that hasn't happened and may well not happen. But it's kind of more like hard science fiction where they really try to, the best they can to like try to represent a vivid scenario based on like what like technical analysis and forecasting suggests is like quite plausible. And so it's still a story I think worth taking seriously. But like it is just one possible view of the future. I suppose, and also like when they're making many different claims about what will happen based on what else will happen, based on a third thing that will happen, like all that like cascading interactions just like magnifies to make it just like incredibly unlikely that any one particular story will be what happens. So I think kind of the way to interact with it is kind of basically being sort of a science fiction story where it's very vivid in terms of like what may happen and just kind of trying to concretely imagine that there is like some chance that things could play out broadly like this, and it then behooves us to be prepared for that and to like anticipate that. But then also there's like a lot of worlds where the story is just like frankly incorrect, or that is correct in some ways but wrong in others, or that is like mostly but not entirely correct. Basically, no professional forecaster, no matter how good they are, is going to say 100 different claims and get all 100 right.
That makes sense. For your response to the AI action plan through the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy, or IAPS, you had this recommendation to establish a rapid emerging assessment council for threats. The acronym is REACT, and it could, quote, rapidly convene cross-disciplinary subject matter experts to assess sudden, emerging, or novel AI-related threats to critical infrastructure or national security. And that's in the name REACT, giving the government capacity to react and respond to changing AI developments. And still sticking with the forecasting trend, I wonder if there's a way to develop proactive capacity around AI. I think one recommendation in your action plan response is related to this, directing the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to assess AI capabilities in places like China or Russia or strategic adversaries. And there's also some recommendations to strengthen AI evaluations, strengthen measurement tools around AI. So I think all of that stuff could be used for forecasting. I think maybe there's other info you might want to gather for forecasting. But what would be your ideal vision if you were running relevant government agency like Commerce or the ODNI or the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy? What kind of AI forecasting questions would you be going for?
Yeah, yeah, I wish I was able to, yeah, be in charge of all that. That sounds quite interesting. I think the biggest challenge for the US government is just like AI is a very new technology, a very critical technology, and a very poorly understood technology. But like given that its importance that we can kind of see and also kind of feel, it's just incredibly clear that the government needs to know what's going on with AI, and that we need kind of all sorts of different ways. We need to be able to react. We also do need to be able to forecast and anticipate, and that the government just needs more technical talent throughout the entire government who kind of can understand AI and anticipate it and be able to kind of, yeah, forecast and orient accordingly. I guess if I could make an analogy, potentially you might think of it as fire. I guess AI has sometimes been compared to a lot of different things. I think, like AI, fire can be used for good, it can be used for evil. It's an important power source, but also can burn down buildings. And when you think about how does the government react to the threat of fire, like the government does not want all the buildings to burn down. So we have like a fire department that when fire is detected, you dispatch the fire trucks and you go and you put the fire out. So that's kind of what we're thinking about when it comes to React. But there's other layers of defense against buildings burning down too. Ideally, we don't wait for the buildings to burn down and then put out the fires, but we anticipate and forecast like what is it that might cause a building to catch on fire? how can we prevent that from happening in the first place? How can we mitigate that? And so we do have parts of the government that are dedicated to assessing fire risk and like figuring out kind of like what ways things should be built, like what ways things should not be built to reduce the risk of a building catching fire in the first place, reduce fire hazards. And that involves a lot of forecasting skill. It also involves like particular building codes. You could have like rules of how you build your buildings. And this doesn't like harm building innovation or meaning that China is going to outcompete us at building apartments. Instead, what it means is that we're just building buildings that we don't want it to burn down, and that we need specific kind of guidelines to tell us like kind of how to manage fire safety within buildings. And I think kind of like the AI approach could be broadly similar to where we combined the Rapid Emerging Assessment Council to kind of be like the fire truck where if there's areas of AI we don't know catch on fire, we can go and put the fire out. But that also we might have the building codes equivalent for AI or the forecasting equivalent for AI, where we can understand like where might AI catch fire and how can we avoid those fires without needing to send the fire trucks in the first place. Because no one likes it when their building's burning down.
It's a good analogy to fire. I think it's illustrative. If you were to continue on this thread, what would that look like? What specifically would be these fire building codes or fire risk prediction mechanisms in the context of AI? Is it just something like forecasting when AI will get above X% on benchmarks? Are there other things that can be done?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is a very multifaceted problem. There's like a lot more than just like what can AI do, but there's like a lot of different ways AI could help the world tremendously, but also a lot of ways where it could catch fire, so to speak. And I kind of think of there maybe being like seven key challenges when it comes to AI. I think first there's kind of like various forms of like misuse, like what happens when the bad guys can set fire to things, basically the arson equivalent of AI, which would be like using AI to launch massive cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, using AI to help terrorists build chemical weapons, biological weapons, the kind of same kind of AI that can like tutor us in science and advance medical cures also can tutor us in virology and advance the creation of novel diseases. So I think that's like an important area to watch out for. I think also as kind of AI becomes more widely integrated across the economy, across government, we know that AI itself is beginning to be able to take independent actions. Those actions right now are not really that impressive, to be honest. Like, I haven't even had AI successfully be able to book me a hotel room, let alone take over the world. But we can already see that AI is increasing in sophistication, and that eventually the actions it's going to take are going to be increasingly sophisticated as well. And so we may have a genuine concern about losing control to a rogue AI system. Likewise, back on the misuse side, may have concern about losing control of our AI systems to an enemy nation like China or Russia or North Korea, adversaries that seek to kind of harm us and would be very interested in developing their own AI tools to do so, very interested in stealing American AI tools, data poisoning, or otherwise manipulating AI tools to wreak havoc. Um, Additionally, it's like possible there could be wars fought over AI at some point. There's also like potential for AI to cause a lot of undue concentration of power or corrupt society, as well as just kind of like a catch-all, all of the above for ways AI might strategically surprise us or destabilize society based on being able to develop technology or develop in a way that we don't anticipate. And so we kind of need to, I think, when kind of rolling AI out for all of its positive benefits, just like we use fire to power all our homes and to keep us warm. We're not trying to like ban fire by any means, but we do need to be aware of like all the various ways that AI or fire could go wrong. The AI equivalent of arson, the AI equivalent of wildfires, the AI equivalent of like accidentally catching fire in the microwave or while you're cooking. Various ways fire can go wrong, various ways AI can go wrong. I hope I'm not overusing the analogy, but just kind of pointing to like a lot of different things the government's going to need to keep an eye on. And I didn't even actually talk about labor impacts as well. Like there's also, even if AI is going well, like there's going to be the whole question of like, as AI takes over more and more jobs and operates those jobs better than humans typically do, like what happens to those humans that are displaced? Like how is society going to adapt to that? So just like a lot of adaptation that's going to need to take place, a lot of ways we're going to have to carefully keep an eye on this technology to make sure that the good uses are emphasized and the bad uses are mitigated or prevented. And that's going to be a huge forecasting challenge.
Hmm. That's a really comprehensive look at, well, I'd say that's a lot of the risks side. I guess first stopping there, do you have an equivalent framework for looking at the opportunities of AI and the
Yeah,
benefits?
definitely. Yeah, I don't want to be a negative Nancy about AI by any means because I think there is a tremendous AI opportunity for America, for the whole world. That basically, I think kind of I've been trying to think more about stories where AI goes just really well for us as well. And I think basically we're already kind of seeing the very beginnings of AI being able to assist scientists with innovating in medicine, innovating in other scientific domains, innovating in like materials science, physical science, industry, logistics, and like kind of all these ways really just kind of like can complement our existing innovators and entrepreneurs and kind of actually like usher in like kind of a golden age of American innovation. And I'm cautiously optimistic that this transformation, if kind of done with a fundamental commitment to human freedom, could really just kind of empower all of us to sort of live better lives. Like each individual human, like they could have unbounded creativity. Like right now, when we want to do things, we're kind of like limited by our own resources and our own abilities. But with like kind of AI powered abundance, AI powered creativity, there really wouldn't be any potential limits to like what we can do. But it is going to be very important. Like I'm not trying to create like some sort of paternalistic utopia where AI systems dictate our choices for our own good, where AI systems know better than we know how to live our own lives, but where AI systems kind of like enhance and uplift existing human creativity, but still, and like give us tremendous economic prosperity, but like still where like kind of human freedoms are really like center to that, and like each individual human still gets kind of their values and preferences respected and preserved and retain the ability to make decisions that are best for them, even if those decisions differ from what an optimization algorithm might recommend.
Hmm. Then taking the frameworks of the risks, the benefits, let's say you have a 50-person government team, or maybe for the sake of brainstorming fuel, a 500-person team
Mm-hmm.
in the government at your disposal, and you can direct them in different buckets of different things to actually forecast. What would the buckets be? what specifically are the main areas to forecast on, or if that's not a helpful way to cut things, what are the questions they should be asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, if we've gotten to the point where there's like a 50-person to 500-person team within the US government that's thinking very thoughtfully about the potential risks and benefits and opportunities of AI, I mean, I think that's already kind of the victory that I've wanted to achieve in the first place. So I haven't really thought that far in terms of like what specifically they do, but I think honestly, if they're the right people and they are in government in that kind of quantity and with that kind of technical skill and they are listened to, like that sounds like a pretty ideal place to be already. I think in terms of like what they should orient around, I think kind of like thinking about AI is like a very multifaceted issue. Like I outlined several challenges, I outlined several risks and several opportunities. I think like government really does need to sort of walk and chew gum at the same time. The government can't afford to laser focus on only one issue and then completely ignore five others. Because I think as good as we are at forecasting and as skilled as we may be, there's still going to be an awful lot of unknown unknowns and still an awful lot of uncertainty when AI unfolds. Again, kind of like the weather, like the government needs to be prepared for it to rain and it needs to be prepared for it to be sunny, regardless of what the weatherman says, just because even like a 5% risk, a 1% risk, like those still happen all the time. And like we prepare for all sorts of things that are really unlikely. We like buckle our seatbelts in the car, even though a car crash is unlikely. We prepare for war with countries, even if we hope that that will never come to pass. And
Some people don't eat cookie dough.
yeah, to be honest, I eat cookie dough, so again, sometimes it's a risk benefit analysis too, and sometimes like we can accept risks, and yeah, we can secure the benefits of cookie dough while mitigating the risks of salmonella. And I think we can do the same thing with AI as well.
Hmm. I think I'd like to zoom into one particular area here, the employment side. You talked about it a little bit. So, the Bureau of Labor Statistics had some employment projections recently that incorporated AI. But I noticed they wrote their projection methods are, quote, not designed to capture extremely rapid technological change and therefore assume that the overall pace of technological change will be consistent with past experience. That's the full quote. So I think that overall assumption might be tenuous if AI models are automating lots of cognitive labor and tasks and jobs that are currently done remotely in the future. And included in that is research on making better AI software and better robots as well. So, do you have any recommendations for this area of employment? How could BLS or other offices and entities forecast employment when accounting for potential rapid technological change through AI doing science and development?
Yeah, I think you've kind of really captured on a really key point, which is that AI is not going to be a gradual, incremental technology. I would say, first of all, I'm not an economist. I'm not experienced with labor statistics. And I would definitely laud the Bureau of Labor Statistics for doing these incorporations of AI impacts in the first place. I think it's a good starting place, even if they're methods are not necessarily designed to fit the way I anticipate AI will actually unfold. I guess it's like a really good start that they're considering this at all. But I think I would, if I were to make some inexperienced recommendations, some armchair forecasting for BLS, I think I would recommend they consider other models for how AI might permeate the labor force, because I think you have like multiple things happening at every given time. Um, basically each month more and more companies adopt AI that already exists, and more companies I think generally maybe they don't fire workers and replace them with AI, though I imagine that does happen some of the times, but maybe they also just hire less than they otherwise would because AI systems can pick up the slack, or maybe when people quit naturally, their roles don't get backfilled and instead get kind of partially automated. And also maybe people's jobs are being reassigned based on what AI can do or cannot do. And then certainly there's probably a lot of jobs that are just kind of getting replaced dramatically. Like there's certainly much less need for translators now that AI is very experienced at translating. Maybe it can't do everything a human can do in the translation domain, but it certainly can do like 90% plus of all the translating. Likewise, AI.
To jump
What?
in here, I saw a post on Twitter, so that's
Hmm.
not the strongest evidence, but it was from an economist who was looking at some of the data on employment statistics. Translator employment seems to be going up, which is a little bit puzzling. But yeah, I take your
Yeah,
point overall
yeah.
that seems like jobs are being affected. Seems like entry level jobs are people are having some trouble there. Maybe that might be from AI. So yeah, keep going.
Yeah, no, I think that also gets to these labor impacts being really hard to predict, which is, I think, why it's just good there to be doing tracking in the first place. But I would kind of keep an eye on the front line of change, such as just like job openings in the first place. Kind of like, are those going down? Like that may happen before you see widespread unemployment. But kind of to your point on the translators, like unsure if that's true or not, but if it is true, it could also speak to what's called the Jevons paradox, which is kind of this idea that as some things get cheaper, kind of translation skill or automation and translation, you may actually want to buy more of it because like a single translator can now do so much more translating than they would do previously if they can be mainly supervising and administering and checking the work of AI systems. But kind of also with kind of each increase in adoption of AI that we already have, there also ends up being kind of new developments in AI systems, new capabilities. And so there's kind of multiple changing dynamics kind of unfolding at the same time, and those really kind of stack on top of each other, which kind of makes a more gradual wave seem just kind of less likely if it's increasing adoption on top of increasing capabilities on top of increasing compounding labor effects. But yeah, definitely want to maintain some humility about not really knowing how this will all unfold. I think another example was the when ATMs became widespread, a lot of human tellers used to be doing those functions, but then their functions kind of changed, and I think bank employment overall wasn't affected, and it may have even gone up again due to Jevons paradox type things of just business to consumer banking becoming a lot easier, becoming cheaper to open up more branches, and just technological connection making a lot of more people want to bank in the first place.
Yeah, there's self checkout at supermarkets too.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's definitely another area where you kind of see a form of automated employment, even though that doesn't actually really have much to do with AI at all.
Hmm.
But does that mean that more stores can open up and then there's still more cashier jobs overall, or does that mean that cashier jobs are plummeting? I think these are good statistics that BLS should be keeping an eye on.
Are there any questions on Metaculus or other forecasting platforms that you've been interested in watching? How the forecast is evolving over time related to AI?
Yeah, I think there are some good employment questions on Metaculus that can kind of keep track of some of the labor impacts, and also just kind of questions in general about yeah, how AI might unfold, or also what the longer term implications of AI might be. I think AI questions end up being some of the most popular on Metaculus. There's a whole section for for AI questions, I can give you kind of a link to include in your show notes if that's a thing that you do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, put that in there. So on this, you were talking about BLS projections not necessarily accounting for how you see AI unfolding. I think you have a good Substack post that unpacks some of that. It's on the Model Evaluation and Threat Research, or METER team's latest research or paper they did. They're studying AI, autonomy, and software engineering. It's specifically, I believe, trying to figure out how good AI is at doing AI research. The paper has a finding that the length of tasks, I'm reading from the paper, measured by how long they take human professionals on that. Oh, just for background, I think I mentioned it already, but this is software engineering tasks, and they're kind of specific, and maybe you'll talk about that. But the length of tasks measured by how long they take human professionals that generalist, autonomous, frontier AI model agents can complete with 50% reliability has been doubling approximately every 7 months. And that's held over the last 6 years. Then this paper came out, and then a little bit later, maybe a month or two, OpenAI gave METER early access to their latest reasoning models, O3 and O4 Mini, and METER found those models might be going even faster than that original 7-month doubling time. So as a statement alone, without going into the nuance, it sounds like, wow, AI is really quickly doing complex tasks on its own related to AI research, and it's doing them for longer and longer stretches of time. And not only is it doing that and doubling every 7 months, maybe it's doubling 7 months now, then doubling 6 months a little later, then doubling 5 months later than that. So you had the Substack post going into that. What is the nuance or the caveats you think policymakers should be knowing when they're interpreting this paper's findings?
Yeah, thanks. Was very excited to put together that post, and I think really appreciated the paper from Meter. And I think like a lot of hard work has just been going into kind of getting that frontline data to track the trends, similar to kind of our BLS conversation about just getting the data to be like a really important part. But then the even harder part is kind of how to interpret this. And I think kind of like the most important things to keep in mind when interpreting this finding is it is very much like specifically about software engineering tasks, and but moreover, also all tasks are like very clearly defined and solitary and static and contained and simple. And basically, like kind of a lot of real work doesn't necessarily really look like that. Like in the real world, we need to coordinate with each other. We need to kind of like figure out what it is that we mean in the first place, and we need to kind of do messy things with really poor feedback. And I think kind of one of the interesting things to see in the paper was that kind of like AIs don't do very well when there's like kind of really low feedback environments. I think that's kind of an area where humans tend to excel.
What's a low feedback environment?
Yeah, so what I mean by low feedback is basically, I think kind of with like a lot of these cases, the AI is trying to solve a problem with a known answer. And so it like attempts a solution, and then it can observe whether the solution succeeds or fails. And if the solution fails, it can like observe an error message or like specific information about why it failed. And then it can kind of craft the second iteration around that feedback. But kind of in the real world, it's actually kind of like we don't necessarily get that level of instant feedback where we can see like if we failed or why we failed. For example, like I'm doing this podcast with you. Maybe I'm doing a really great job and everyone loves this podcast, or maybe actually I'm really terrible and this is going to be your least podcast of all time. But I'm not getting live feedback right now. Like you're not being like, hey, you're really not good at this podcasting thing. So I'm just kind of like winging it, talking to you right now, very low feedback environment. And I'm not going to see whether the podcast does well or does poorly until it's really too late to shape it. And that's the kind of thing that AI tends to be pretty poor at. So like if
Lucky for you.
yeah, if you're doing an AI interviewing an AI on your podcast, like maybe it'll be terrible, but it won't really get a chance to adjust without that feedback. Yeah, I feel like yeah, maybe podcast guests are going to be some of the last professions on Earth. Um, yeah, so looking forward to starting my career here in podcast guesting. Um, but yeah, so like kind of very difficult to get this data in the first place for the meter paper, even more difficult to like translate that to real world performance. But I do want to also caution your listeners. Maybe a lot of you are listening to me and be like, oh, that meter paper must be like a pile of junk and AI will never amount to anything. I think that it's also important to kind of take the other side as well, which is basically like we are seeing models succeed at tasks that they used to not succeed. This level of success is indeed increasing over time, and we've kind of just began the process of training AI agents to be able to kind of like take specific like job relevant actions. We've just started training models to be able to experiment and iterate, and a lot of these skills can speed up. So like I think literally like 3 years ago there wasn't an AI on the planet that could code software, and now I mean yeah, if I say this actually having been a software engineer for several years professionally, like AI honestly can do a lot of software relevant tasks better than I can. And that's just like kind of really truly phenomenal, and kind of just thinking where AI might be in the software domain, let alone other domains, in just a few years' time, is pretty tremendous. And I think also if AI ended up becoming really good at programming software, that may actually be some key skills where AI could then figure out how to develop even stronger AI systems, and you could even get like a runaway feedback loop. So all this to be said, it's like again a very large range of futures. Some futures where AI doesn't really amount to much at all for a long time, and some futures where AI just like takes all our jobs in just a matter of years. And I tried to kind of meticulously map out what I was viewing as the range of futures based on the data in the meter paper, and kind of trying to translate that into like a more general prediction for yeah, labor automation and AI impacts in labor.
Hmm. Speaking of taking jobs, I wanted to talk about a little bit AI's role in forecasting, whether the forecasting jobs are safe. I think this seems like a separate, just a random profession, but it does actually tie in a bit to potential speed ups. You know, there's some interesting science speed ups you might be able to do if instead of doing every single research experiment, you just predict whether it will succeed or fail. And then for the ones where you're unsure, then you do this full experiment. There have been some papers on AI forecasting, sometimes using language models as a cog in a machine, as a step and part of a bit of a broader pipeline. And they've found some great successes. There was also on Metaculus a ongoing, I think, series of quarterly prize contests, and it's looking at who can build the best AI forecasting system. They recently analyzed the results from quarter 4 of last year, 2024, and the post was called "Bots Are Closing the Gap." And it found, reading from the post, Metaculus Pro forecasters were better than the top bot team, so humans still in the lead, but not with statistical significance. And there's even a Metaculus question called, when will an AI program be better than humans at making Metaculus forecasts? That might be one of the last questions to resolve, I guess.
Yeah.
Like the aggregated community prediction is 50% by 2031. So how good is AI at forecasting today?
Yeah. I think actually it's funny that you mentioned that question because that's a question actually I personally contributed to the Metaculus platform, and I contributed that back in 2021. So kind of tracking how well AI is at taking over my favorite hobby of forecasting. It's definitely something I've had my eye on for a while. Um, and I would say that I think AIs right now are increasingly skilled at some areas of forecasting, especially if you think that like a really key aspect of forecasting is kind of rapidly getting up to speed in a particular new domain and like kind of just really trying to learn the key factors that make a probability like higher or lower. Like AI is actually exceptional at that. Like AI can search the internet, tree all the relevant documents and research and news articles and analyze them and digest them into key factors. And like that's actually something AI is like extremely skilled at. So even as a forecaster myself, like even as like kind of doing this as a human, like I still rely significantly on AI tools at minimum to kind of like try to digest all the relevant information into kind of like yeah key factors for or against, and then be able to present that to myself. Um, and then I think the of course the final part is like taking all those key factors and putting a number on it. And I think this is also an area where AI is developing emerging skill, but where it's still not quite at the level of a human forecaster, at least a skilled human forecaster. I think AI is probably better than a typical person at forecasting, just because a typical person doesn't have much experience. But if you're like competing at the highest levels of forecasting, I think there's still kind of a lot of ways where AI can kind of get things wrong or embarrassingly wrong. I think generally, what I've seen is AI is pretty good at figuring out the revealed wisdom of like what the news is saying, what people are saying. So like if there's people quoted in the media saying something seems 50-50, the forecast will pick it up as being 50-50. But I think kind of what the true forecasting skill is right now is like kind of figuring out something that's counterintuitive, figuring out something that the conventional wisdom has missed, and then actually being right, not being a conspiracy theorist, but like actually being right about what was missed. And then I think that's usually what powers some of my best forecasts. And I haven't really seen AI be able to do that yet, but it's certainly getting a lot more close every year. And so I think I would probably agree with Metaclus that maybe around 2031 or so, I don't think I may have much to add to AI forecasts anymore. Kind of similar to how I can't beat AI at chess, even if I was really well practiced at chess, which I'm actually not.
Wow, okay. Maybe this is there's certainly benefits there if you put this in the US government. As we were circling back to the start of the interview, we were talking about the need for forecasting expertise. If it becomes that you can have forecasters on tap by just hooking up a GPU and running the AI model on it, then could be good. I don't know what the net effects would be if everyone had access to that, but we're coming to the close of the interview. So how do you predict the next roughly 2-3 years of AI will go? What do you think are the main trends audience members should be watching and seeing unfold?
Yeah. First, I guess want to comment on the net effects of AI forecasting skill. I mean, I do think that would just be extremely beneficial if, especially if like all of us had like quite wise, informed advisors that could like kind of really help us accurately anticipate like the effects of our actions. I think just kind of informing everybody would just sort of lead to a better society, especially if we were still free to make mistakes or do things the way we want, at least as long as we're informed. I think that's like pretty key to yeah, improving society while kind of maintaining human freedom, like I was mentioning. And so I think that's one of the areas I'm really optimistic about AI. I guess I think in terms of like what to keep an eye on, I think what I've been trying to communicate is that I certainly have ideas and opinions about how the next 2 years will unfold. But I think kind of like a weatherman, I sort of want to give you like more of a range of possibilities, and just kind of suggest to you like different paths the future may go. So I think I probably won't just like tell you one specific story that I think is likely or not likely, but instead like kind of suggest things to keep an eye on. Um, I think kind of like this year, 2025. So like as of today, AI agents don't seem particularly helpful. I haven't really benefited from these like ideas of AIs that could like book flights or book hotels or help you shop for groceries. Like it's just not really working or coming together for me right now. But this is like an area of like extremely heavy investment, extremely heavy effort. I would think that it's like plausible that by the end of the year, there actually will be like pretty good AI tools that can like just really help automate a lot of simple things in your life. I think if we're getting to the point at the end of the year where these tools are starting to be quite helpful, I think that suggests a pretty rapid AI future where AI is going to be able to go from being useful at like fairly mundane, quick things to like useful at like much more complex things. Kind of doubling quickly, like the meter paper suggests, in just like a few years' time. I think if we come to the end of the year and AI agents are still kind of crap like they are now, that's definitely a bearish signal. Suggests that maybe AI is actually going to take much longer to have widespread labor impacts. I think it will still happen, but maybe it will take like several decades as opposed to several years. And I think we'll be able to kind of get some early signs on that in 2025. I think similarly, like we've seen a lot of increases in the skills of reasoning agents at like kind of being able to do some complex math and science tasks. I think we don't yet really know how well those reasoning skills will scale. And I think again by the end of the year, if we haven't seen strong, like continued strong increases in science and math skills of AI, that suggests again that this is going to be like a much slower road where maybe new innovations are needed that we don't have. But if we are continuing to see rapid increases, I would expect that would mean we would see even more rapid increases over the next few years. So actually, I think 2025 is really a pretty key make or break year where we'll be seeing whether we'll be getting like super fast scaling or whether scaling is actually going to just be more slow and steady. But I guess I think we probably know enough right now, at least, to know one way or another, whether it's decades from now or mere years from now, one way or another, AI is going to be a really big part of our life.
And before we close, any final thoughts to add to that? Anything on the interview as a whole, forecasting AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main point I've been just trying to communicate is that yeah, there's a range of possibilities with AI. I don't think any one person knows exactly what's going to happen, but what we do know is that this is going to be a tremendously important technology. I think some people say AI is transformative, but like the internet was transformative, right? Like, but what I'm trying to say is I think AI will be much more transformative than the internet. And I'm not saying this as like some hypester. I don't have like a course to sell you. I don't work for a tech company. I'm saying this like extremely literally with all the precision of like a forecaster that whether it takes years or decades, one way or another, AI is going to be literally a very transformative technology. Um, and that this means basically it's all of our responsibilities, not just policymakers, but like kind of really every single person, every single citizen, all of our responsibilities to be like quite informed about what AI can do in our lives and what the benefits and opportunities are, but also what the risks are and like how we can kind of be really thoughtful about how this is being rolled out into society.
Great. That's a good place to close. And if people want to follow up on your work, where should they go on the internet?
Yeah, so I'm quite active on Twitter, or I guess they call it X now, whatever. Yeah, but you could go to x.com/Peter Wildeford, Wildeford, and follow my tweets. I tweet a lot about AI. Likewise, if you're interested in kind of the deeper analysis, the forecasting, about AI and other things, I have a Substack as well at peterwildeford.substack.com. Yeah, definitely very excited to have everyone sort of check out my work and yeah, interested in providing more forecasts that people find valuable.
Yeah, I have, in preparation for the interview, read a lot of the Substack posts, and I think people would really benefit from reading them. I think they're really thoughtful and fun and engaging to read, so I recommend that.
Things. Yeah, and I'm trying to just help people, like I said, kind of keep track of trends in AI, kind of understand what's going on, trying to kind of break it down in a way that I think people would appreciate. And it's not just AI too, like I also just wrote about the India-Pakistan conflict. I've been following Ukraine and other geopolitical trends. So yeah, just trying to help people be more informed.
Awesome. Okay, well, Peter, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. It was really great.